Myanmar's powerful army chief arrived late Monday for talks with Pope Francis in Yangon, with the military facing heavy global censure for causing an exodus of Rohingya Muslims from the country. A motorcade arrived at the archbishop's residence where the Pope is staying, an AFP reporter said, in a late scheduled addition to the Pope's itinerary during his four-day Myanmar trip. Army Chief Min Aung Hlaing is the man accused of overseeing a brutal campaign to drive out the country's Rohingya Muslim minority. The 80-year-old pontiff, the first to travel to Myanmar, was welcomed at the airport by children from different minority groups in bright, bejeweled clothes, who gave him flowers and received a papal embrace in return. Related reading nuns in white habits were among the devotees who have traveled from across the country in his honor, waving flags as his motorcade swept past the golden Shwedagon pagoda to the archbishop's residence in downtown Yangon, where the Pope will stay on Monday night. "I saw the Pope. I was so pleased. I cried," Christina Iasine, 48, told AFP after the Pope's convoy was met by a warm but modest welcome in the non-Catholic country. "His face looked very lovely and sweet. He is coming here for peace." But these joyful scenes were in stark contrast to the gravity of the main issue that frames his trip. Myanmar's military stands accused of waging a campaign of ethnic cleansing against Rohingya Muslims. More than 620,000 of the persecuted minority have fled a crackdown in northern Rakhine state for neighboring Bangladesh over the past 3 months. The Pope has called the Rohingya his brothers and sisters in repeated entreaties to ease their plight. The Pope's four-day visit intensifies pressure on Myanmar over its treatment of the stateless minority, a group he has called his brothers and sisters in repeated entreaties to ease their plight. His speeches will be scrutinized by Buddhist hardliners for any mention of the word Rohingya, an incendiary term in a country where the Muslim group are reviled and labeled Bengalis alleged illegal immigrants from Bangladesh. Francis will meet civilian leader Aung San Suu Kyi, a Nobel Peace Prize winner whose luster has faded because of her failure to speak up publicly for the Rohingya. Speaking to a crowd of 30,000 people in St. Peter's Square, shortly before he left Rome, the pontiff said, "I ask you to be with me in prayer so that, for these peoples, my presence is a sign of affinity and hope." His visit is a historic chance for Myanmar's flock to get close to the head of their church. Myanmar's estimated 700,000 Catholics make up just over 1% of the country's 51 million people and are scattered in far-flung corners of the nation, many of them roiled by conflict. About 200,000 Catholics are pouring into Yangon, Myanmar's commercial capital, by plane, train and car ahead of a huge open-air mass on Wednesday. "We are ready to welcome the Pope cheery, with pure hearts," a woman from the northernmost state of Kachin told AFP, one of hundreds waiting near the archbishop's residence in Yangon. More than 620,000 Rohingyas have fled a crackdown in northern Rakhine state for neighboring Bangladesh over the past 3 months. Prayers for peace, but the Rohingya crisis frames the Pope's visit. The army, which ran the country with an iron fist for nearly half a century, insists its Rakhine operation was a proportionate response to Rohingya terrorists who raided police posts in late August, killing at least a dozen officers, but rights groups, the UN and the U.S. have accused the army of using its operation as cover to drive out a minority it has oppressed for decades. That is at odds with views inside the country. The vast majority of people in Myanmar do not believe the international narrative of abuse against the Rohingya and the refugee numbers that we're seeing in Bangladesh, said Myanmar-based political analyst Richard Horsey. If the Pope did come and weigh in heavily on this issue, it would inflame tensions and it would inflame public sentiment, he added. Days before the Pope's visit, Myanmar and Bangladesh inked a deal vowing to begin repatriating Rohingya refugees in 2 months, but details of the agreement, including the use of temporary shelters for returnees, many of whose homes have been burned to the ground, raise questions for Rohingya fearful of coming back without guarantees of basic rights. Noor Muhammad, a 45-year-old Rohingya imam at the Naipara refugee camp in Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh, said he hoped the Pope would tell the Myanmar government to accept Rohingya, give citizenship to them and end all discriminations against them. "How you can help.